Parents, how did it feel when your child turned into a walking disaster? When my son turned 16, I thought the worst thing he could do was crash my car. I was so naive. It started with small things, $20 missing from my wallet, my laptop password mysteriously changed, food disappearing from the fridge overnight. Normal teenage stuff, I told myself. Boys will be boys. Then I found the credit card statements. $3,000 charged to something called Digital Phoenix Gaming. When I confronted him, he just shrugged and said he'd pay me back. How exactly? I asked. He was failing chemistry and spent his afternoons locked in his room. That's the source of all the money, he said, pointing at his setup. I thought he meant he was planning to get a job, maybe sell some of his gaming equipment. I was wrong. So very wrong. The calls from other parents started around the same time. Their kids were suddenly afraid to go to school. Some were having panic attacks. Others begged to transfer schools. I brushed it off as typical high school drama. One mother called crying. Her daughter had attempted suicide after someone leaked her private messages about her sexuality to the entire school. The posts came from anonymous accounts that couldn't be traced. Another father was furious. His son had been paying someone $200 a month from his summer job savings to keep quiet about their family's problems. When the boy couldn't pay anymore, screenshots of their private conversations appeared on every social media platform at school. A third parent was desperate. Their daughter had developed severe anxiety after intimate photos she'd shared with a boyfriend were posted online. The family was considering moving to another state. A fourth caller was barely coherent through her sobs. Her 13-year-old had been hospitalized after a severe panic attack triggered by someone exposing her eating disorder to the entire school. The posts included detailed descriptions of her purging habits and photos of her at her lowest weight. I felt terrible for these families, but I never connected it to my son. He was just a quiet kid who spent too much time on his computer. Sure, he'd become manipulative and cold over the past year, but most teenagers go through difficult phases. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. The expensive clothes he claimed were gifts from friends. The way he'd laugh while scrolling through his phone, then quickly close it when I walked by. How he always seemed to know gossip about his classmates before anyone else. Most disturbing was how he'd started talking about other people. He'd describe his classmates' weaknesses and insecurities with clinical detachment, like a scientist studying lab rats. When I asked how he knew so much about their personal lives, he'd shrug and say people tell him things because he's a good listener. He'd started bringing home expensive electronics that he claimed were prizes from gaming tournaments. When I asked to see proof of these tournaments, he'd show me elaborate websites and fake certificates that looked completely legitimate. The gifts for me started around this time too. Designer purses, expensive jewelry, spa certificates. He said he wanted to thank me for being such a supportive mother. I was so touched by his thoughtfulness that I never questioned how he could afford these things. My friends would comment on how mature and thoughtful he'd become, how lucky I was to have such a generous son. I basked in their envy, proud of the young man he was becoming. I had no idea I was wearing jewelry bought with blood money. The next morning, my phone rang at 6 a.m. Unknown number. Mrs. Patterson, this is Detective Rodriguez with the Cyber Crimes Unit. We need to discuss your son. My blood turned to ice. Your son has been running an illegal gambling operation through online gaming platforms. We've been tracking him for months. I sat down hard on the kitchen floor. The detective continued. He's been taking bets from minors across 3 states. The operation has processed over $40,000 in the past 6 months. He's created fake identities, used stolen credit card numbers, and recruited other teenagers to help run the scheme. My 16-year-old son was running a gambling ring, but that wasn't the worst part. We also found evidence he's been selling homework completion services to students nationwide. Fake IDs, essay mills, test answers, even taking online classes for other students. The operation has hundreds of clients paying monthly fees. He's been charging anywhere from $50 to $500 per assignment, depending on complexity and deadline. My hand started shaking, and there's something else. Something much more serious. The line went quiet except for my ragged breathing. Ma'am, we found communication suggesting he's been blackmailing his classmates. Photos, private messages, personal information. We need to bring him in for questioning. I looked up the stairs toward his room where he was probably still sleeping peacefully. We've identified at least 17 victims so far. The youngest is 13. Your son has been systematically collecting their secrets, then demanding payment to keep quiet. Can you have him at the station by noon today? My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Detective, I managed to whisper, there's something else you should know. All those calls from other parents. All those kids suddenly afraid to go to school. The suicide attempt. The panic attacks. The intimate photos posted online. My son was behind all of it. What I told Detective Rodriguez changed everything. For months, I'd been getting calls from distraught parents whose children were being terrorized by an anonymous cyberbully. I'd offered sympathy and shared resources, never imagining my own son was the predator destroying their families. The detective's voice became grim as I recounted each call. By the time I finished, I could hear him taking notes frantically. Mrs. Patterson, this is much worse than we thought. We were investigating him for financial crimes, but what you're describing suggests a level of psychological warfare that's extremely rare in someone this young. The blackmail scheme was sophisticated and intentionally cruel. He'd spent months identifying vulnerable students, then systematically befriending them through carefully crafted personas designed to appeal to their specific insecurities. For the lonely kids, he'd be the understanding friend who really listened. For the overachievers, he'd be the study partner who shared their academic ambitions. For the outcasts, he'd be the fellow misfit who understood their pain. He'd spend weeks or even months earning their complete trust, becoming the most important person in their lives. They'd confide their deepest secrets, share their most vulnerable moments, trust him with information they'd never told anyone else. Then he'd use everything against them. Screenshots of private conversations about family problems, photos they'd sent thinking they were safe with a trusted friend, personal information about sexuality, mental health struggles, eating disorders, abuse at home. He'd catalog it all, building detailed psychological profiles on each victim. When he had enough leverage, he'd make his move. Pay me or everyone sees your secrets. Most kids paid. The ones who couldn't or wouldn't found their most intimate moments broadcast to their entire school through anonymous social media accounts he controlled. But the truly sick part was how he'd continue the friendship even after destroying them. He'd comfort them after ruining their lives, positioning himself as their only support system, while secretly documenting their breakdowns for his own entertainment. The girl who'd attempted suicide had confided in him about her struggles with her sexuality and her fear of coming out to religious parents. He'd spent 3 months being her closest confidant, helping her research LGBTQ resources, even talking her through panic attacks about her identity. Then he'd demanded $800 to keep quiet. When she couldn't pay, he'd posted her private messages with rainbow flag emojis and heart eye emojis, making it look like she'd been bragging about her sexuality to mock her religious family. After the posts went viral at school, he'd been the first person to reach out with comfort and support, pretending to be horrified by the leak while secretly recording her sobbing gratitude for his friendship. The boy paying $200 a month had trusted my son with details about his father's alcoholism and his parents' violent fights. My son had visited their house dozens of times, becoming like a second son to the family. He'd witnessed the father's drunken rages, seen the broken furniture and hole-punched walls, gained the mother's trust by being the polite, helpful friend who seemed to have such a positive influence. Then he'd use that access to photograph evidence of the dysfunction, record audio of the fights, and hold it all over the boy's head. When the payment stopped, he'd sent the evidence to the boy's teachers, coaches, and extended family, destroying not just the boy but his entire family's reputation in their small community. A 13-year-old girl had been paying him $50 a week from her babysitting money to keep quiet about her eating disorder. She'd shared her struggles with body image, her secret purging, her parents' upcoming divorce that was triggering her need for control. He'd become her primary emotional support, checking on her daily, celebrating small victories in her recovery, even researching healthy coping mechanisms to share with her. For months, she believed he was the one person who truly understood her struggle. Then he'd leaked everything anyway, posting her private messages to a school gossip account with thousands of followers, including photos he'd secretly taken of her when she was at her lowest weight. The caption read, "When you're so desperate for attention, you'll literally starve yourself for sympathy." But the most disturbing case was a 14-year-old boy whose mother was dying of cancer. My son had befriended him during the hardest period of his life, offering comfort and understanding about losing a parent. He'd even attended the mother's funeral, comforting the grieving family and positioning himself as the boy's closest friend during his darkest hour. Afterward, he'd demanded $500 to keep quiet about embarrassing things the boy had shared during his grief. When the boy couldn't pay, my son had posted audio recordings of him crying about his mother's death, including his admission that sometimes he wished she'd die faster so the pain would stop. The recording had been posted with the caption, "Listen to this pathetic loser crying about his dead mommy. No wonder she wanted to escape from having such a weak son." Detective Rodriguez's voice was barely controlled when he explained that case. "Your son attended this child's mother's funeral and comforted the family, then used that child's grief as entertainment for strangers on the internet." I hung up and walked to my son's room. The door was locked, which was new. I'd never known him to lock his door before. I knocked. "We need to talk." "I'm busy," he called out. "Big tournament today." "Can it wait?" The police called. The sounds from inside the room stopped immediately. I could hear rapid typing, like he was frantically trying to delete something. After a long pause, I heard him walking to the door. Multiple locks clicked open. He stood there in his pajamas, hair messy from sleep, looking like the innocent boy I remembered from elementary school. But his eyes were different now, calculating and cold, like he was assessing me as a potential threat. "What did you tell them?" he asked quietly. I told them about the calls from other parents, about the money, about everything I know. His expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "You don't understand what you're talking about," he said in a voice that was calm and reasonable. "Those people are lying. They're trying to blame me for their kids' problems because they can't handle the truth about what their precious babies are really like." The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced. For a moment, I almost believed him. This was my son, after all. The boy I'd raised, the child I loved. Then I remembered the detective's words. 17 victims. The youngest is 13. "Get dressed," I said. "We're going to the police station." His mask finally slipped. The charming, manipulative expression I'd been seeing for months disappeared, replaced by something that made my blood run cold. Pure, predatory calculation. "You have no idea what you've done," he said quietly. "You think you're protecting those pathetic losers, but you're just making everything worse. They deserved what happened to them. They're weak, and weak people get eaten." I stared at my son and realized I was looking at a complete stranger. He started laughing, a sound that made my skin crawl. "You want to know the best part? Most of them still think I'm their friend. They blame themselves for what happened. They think they did something wrong, that they deserve to be punished. That's how pathetic they are." I started backing away from him. He followed me down the hallway, his voice getting more excited as he spoke. "The suicide girl? She sent me a thank you note from the hospital. Said she was sorry for causing drama and hoped we could still be friends when she got out. Can you believe that? Even after I destroyed her life, she was apologizing to me." My back hit the wall. "And the fat girl with the eating disorder? She's lost 30 pounds since I exposed her. I probably did her a favor. Now she's too scared to eat anything. Problem solved." I couldn't breathe. The kid whose mom died? He tried to kill himself last week. Didn't succeed, obviously, because he's too much of a failure to even do that right. But it was hilarious watching everyone at school pretend to care about him when they were all laughing at my recordings just days before. You should be proud of me, Mom. I figured out how to make money and clean up the gene pool at the same time. Natural selection for the digital age. That's when I knew. This wasn't a phase or a mistake or teenage rebellion gone wrong. This was who he really was. This was who he'd always been, and I'd just been too blind to see it. I ran to my bedroom and locked the door. He pounded on it, screaming about how I was ruining his life, how those losers didn't matter, how I was choosing strangers over my own flesh and blood. The pounding stopped suddenly, and I heard him talking on the phone in a calm, professional voice. Hey, listen, there's been a change of plans. My mom's being difficult about something, so we need to accelerate the timeline. Release everything tonight. All the level 3 files, everything we've been saving for the nuclear option. I called Detective Rodriguez back with shaking hands. Something's wrong with him, I whispered. Something's seriously wrong. And I think he's about to release more information about his victims. We know, the detective said. We've been monitoring his communications since our call. Can you get out of the house safely? I climbed out my bedroom window for the first time since I was a teenager, cutting my hands on the screen and bruising my knees on the ground below. The drive to the police station felt like it took hours. My son had called my phone 37 times in 20 minutes. The voicemail started apologetic and manipulative, then gradually became threatening. Mom, please, you're misunderstanding everything. Those kids are lying because they're embarrassed about their own mistakes. Mom, I need you to call the police back and tell them you made a mistake. This is all just a big misunderstanding. Mom, you're really starting to piss me off. Do you have any idea what I'm capable of? What I know about you? You can't hide from me. I know where you work. I know where you shop. I know your routines, your passwords, your secrets. I know everything about you, just like I knew everything about them. And now everyone's going to know everything about you too. By the time I reached the police station, he'd sent me dozens of text messages containing personal information about my life that he shouldn't have known. Details about my bank account, my medical records, private conversations I'd had with friends, photos that had been taken of me without my knowledge. The final text simply read, "This is just the beginning." At the station, Detective Rodriguez was waiting with a female officer, a social worker, and what looked like a SWAT team preparing for a raid. "We've been monitoring your son's online activity since you called," the detective explained. In the past 3 hours, he's attempted to delete terabytes of data, contact dozens of associates to warn them about the investigation, and post what appear to be revenge pornography images of several classmates on multiple platforms. My knees gave out. We've also intercepted communications suggesting he's planning to release what he calls a nuclear option, a massive data dump of personal information on dozens of students and their family. Photos, private messages, medical records, financial information, family secrets, everything he's been collecting for years. How is that even possible? I asked. He's been running what amounts to a private intelligence operation, catfishing school counselors and social workers, pretending to be a concerned student who needs help with friends who are struggling. They gave him confidential information thinking they were helping troubled kids. The female officer leaned forward. He's also been hacking into school systems, medical databases, and social services records. We found evidence of identity theft involving dozens of families. He's been using stolen information to open credit cards, take out loans, even file fraudulent insurance claims. But that's not the worst part, Detective Rodriguez continued. We've discovered that he's been selling this information to adult predators online. Photos of minors, their personal information, their home addresses, their daily schedules. I thought I was going to be sick. We've identified at least 3 separate cases where adults used information provided by your son to stalk or approach minors. One girl was followed home from school by a man who knew her name, her schedule, and personal details about her family that could only have come from your son's files. The social worker's voice was gentle but firm. "Mrs. Patterson, we need you to understand something. This level of manipulation, the complete lack of empathy, the systematic exploitation of vulnerable people, this isn't typical teenage rebellion or even criminal behavior. We're dealing with someone who shows classic signs of antisocial personality disorder with psychopathic features. But he's my baby," I whispered. The female officer's voice was kind but unflinching. "Ma'am, your baby has been systematically destroying other people's children for years. Right now, there are dozens of families dealing with the aftermath of his actions. Some of these kids may never recover from what he's done to them. The arrest took 6 hours and required search warrants for our entire house, his school locker, and several remote storage facilities he'd been renting under false names. What they found was beyond anything I could have imagined. Terabytes of stolen data organized in detailed files on hundreds of people. Not just students, but their families, teachers, coaches, neighbors. He'd been building psychological profiles on anyone who might be useful to him, documenting their weaknesses, fears, and secrets. Financial records showed income from multiple illegal schemes, totaling over $200,000 in the past 2 years. The gambling operation was just the tip of the iceberg. He'd been running fake charity websites, selling counterfeit merchandise, operating romance scams targeting lonely adults, and even selling fake prescription medications to teenagers. But the most disturbing discovery was what the detective called his trophy room. Hundreds of videos of his victims crying, having panic attacks, or breaking down after he'd destroyed their lives. He'd been secretly recording video calls where he pretended to comfort them, capturing their pain for his own entertainment. The files were meticulously organized, categories like suicides, breakdowns, family destruction, and school shooting potential. Each video was tagged with detailed notes about what had triggered the victim's response and how their pain could be maximized in the future. In one video, the girl who'd attempted suicide was sobbing while thanking him for being such a good friend, even after he'd ruined her life. He'd kept multiple angles of this recording and had been showing it to associates as proof of his psychological control over his victim. Another video showed the boy whose mother had died, calling my son at 3 a.m. in a suicidal crisis, begging for help and support. The audio of that call had been used as background music for a compilation video my son had made celebrating his most successful psychological destructions. The investigators also found evidence of something they called escalation planning, documents outlining how to push his victims towards self-harm, how to identify which students might be capable of violence against others, and detailed plans for what he called the ultimate social experiment, seeing how many people he could drive to suicide simultaneously. One document contained a list of students he believed were capable of school shootings, along with plans for how to manipulate them toward violence while ensuring he wouldn't be connected to their actions. The bail hearing was a nightmare that lasted 2 days. The prosecutor presented evidence of dozens of charges spanning multiple felony categories: extortion, wire fraud, identity theft, harassment, distribution of child pornography, stalking, computer crimes, and something called criminal enterprise that I'd never heard of before. The most serious charges involved what they called conspiracy to commit violence. The prosecutor argued that my son had been actively trying to push troubled students toward harming themselves or others, not just for money, but for his own psychological gratification. The judge was clearly disturbed by what he'd heard over 2 days of testimony. This court has presided over thousands of juvenile cases over the past 20 years, but the calculated cruelty, sophisticated planning, and complete lack of remorse demonstrated by this defendant is unlike anything I've encountered. The evidence suggests the defendant views other human beings not as people deserving of basic dignity, but as resources to be exploited and discarded for his entertainment and profit. The prosecution had requested that my son be tried as an adult due to the severity and sophistication of his crimes. The judge agreed. Bail was set at $500,000 with conditions that included complete isolation from internet access, no contact with any victims or their families, GPS monitoring, and daily check-ins with a probation officer. I didn't have $500,000. Even if I'd had it, I wasn't sure I would have paid it. That night, alone in my house for the first time in months, I started going through his room properly. What I found made me physically sick and fundamentally changed my understanding of who my son really was. He'd been planning this operation for years. There were notebooks dating back to elementary school where he'd analyzed his classmates' weaknesses, practiced manipulation techniques on teachers and other adults, and developed increasingly sophisticated strategies for gaining trust and exploiting vulnerabilities. One journal entry from 4th grade read, "Found out that if you cry at the right moment, adults will give you anything you want. Practice crying in the mirror every night." A 5th grade entry, "Tommy's parents are getting divorced. He's really sad about it. I could use this to make him do my homework, but I should wait and see what other secrets he tells me first." By middle school, the entries had become disturbing manifestos about human psychology and social manipulation. Figured out that the sad kids are the easiest targets. They're so grateful for attention that they'll do anything to keep you as their friend, even pay you. People are basically computers. Input the right code, get the result you want. Most people's code is pathetically simple. The best victims are the ones with mental health problems because they already blame themselves for everything. When you hurt them, they think they deserve it. He'd been studying psychology textbooks, but not to understand or help people. He'd been learning about human vulnerability so he could exploit it more efficiently. His computer history showed years of research into depression, anxiety, eating disorders, self-harm, and suicide methods. But he wasn't researching these topics to understand his victim's pain. He was learning about them so he could inflict that pain more effectively. One document contained detailed plans for driving specific students to suicide, including timelines, psychological pressure points, and what he called leverage optimization, ways to maximize their despair while minimizing his own legal exposure. Another file contained audio recordings of guidance counselors and social workers discussing confidential cases. He'd been wearing hidden recording devices during meetings where he'd claimed to be worried about friends who were struggling. The most chilling discovery was a document called Future Projects that read like a business plan for psychological terrorism. It contained strategies for expanding his operations to other schools in different states, recruiting other teenagers to work for him, and developing new ways to monetize human suffering. He'd been researching how to hack into therapy apps, suicide prevention hotlines, and online counseling platforms to access even more sensitive information about vulnerable people. The document also included plans to target adults, teachers who'd given him bad grades, parents who'd complained about his behavior, community leaders who might oppose his activities. He'd compiled detailed psychological profiles on dozens of adults and had been developing long-term strategies for destroying their lives if they ever became threats to his operations. One section was titled The Mom Problem and contained a step-by-step plan for dealing with me if I ever became suspicious of his activities. The plan included ways to discredit me, destroy my reputation, and ultimately drive me to suicide if I couldn't be controlled through other means. Reading my own psychological profile in his handwriting was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. He documented my insecurities, my daily routines, my relationships, my fears. He knew me better than I knew myself, and he'd been planning to use that knowledge to destroy me if necessary. The trial preparation took 8 months. Prosecutor after prosecutor told me they'd never seen anything like this from someone so young. The evidence filled dozens of storage boxes. The victim impact statements alone filled 3 large binders. During this time, my son was held in a secure facility for dangerous juveniles. Even there, he found ways to continue his operation. He'd been writing detailed psychological profiles of other inmates and their families, then using that information to manipulate them into providing him with contraband and special privileges. When the facility tried to limit his communication, he found ways to smuggle messages out through visitors, corrupt guards, and even hidden notes in his legal paperwork. The defense attorney tried every possible angle: mental illness, internet addiction, peer pressure, family dysfunction, genetic predisposition, traumatic brain injury, video game violence, social media influence. Nothing stuck because the evidence showed clear premeditation, sophisticated planning, and a complete understanding of right and wrong. My son had known exactly what he was doing, had planned it meticulously, and had enjoyed every moment of his victim's suffering. The psychiatric evaluations were devastating. Multiple experts agreed that he showed classic signs of antisocial personality disorder with psychopathic features. The level of manipulation, the complete absence of empathy, and the systematic exploitation of human suffering were consistent with the most dangerous type of personality disorder. During our court-mandated family therapy sessions, my son's performance was masterful. He could cry on cue, express what appeared to be genuine remorse, and make promises that sounded completely sincere. He'd talk about his mistakes, his desire to change, his love for his victims, and his hope that they could forgive him. But when he thought no one was watching, his real personality would emerge. He'd make subtle threats, manipulate other people in the waiting room, and collect information about the therapists and other families for potential future use. One day, I watched him comfort a crying mother whose son had been caught selling drugs at school. He offered her tissues, listened to her story with apparent empathy, and even gave her his phone number in case she needed someone to talk to. Later, I found him researching her family online, building a profile on her son's drug activities and her family's financial problems. When I confronted him about it, he just smiled. "She's weak," he said. "Weak people are opportunities. I'm just keeping my options open." The therapist was eventually forced to break confidentiality and report to the court that my son posed a continued danger to society. "This young man shows no capacity for genuine remorse or behavioral change," she wrote in her report. "His expressions of regret are performative, designed to manipulate the therapeutic process and legal system. I believe he represents a significant ongoing threat to any community in which he's placed." The other parents formed a support group that met weekly in the basement of a community center. Some nights there were 30 people in that room, sharing stories about their children's trauma and trying to make sense of what had happened to our families. One mother hadn't spoken to her daughter in 6 months. The girl blamed herself for trusting my son and had become completely withdrawn, refusing to leave her room or interact with anyone. A father had spent his entire retirement savings on private therapy, medication, and even experimental treatments for his son, who developed severe PTSD and couldn't function in normal social situations. Several families had moved to different states, trying to escape the trauma and shame of what had happened. But even after moving, they'd receive anonymous messages containing personal information that could only have come from my son's files. The most heartbreaking case was the mother of the girl who'd attempted suicide. She spoke in a flat, emotionless voice, like all feeling had been drained from her. "My daughter doesn't trust anyone anymore. She won't talk to counselors, won't make friends, won't even talk to family members without recording the conversation. She's convinced everyone is trying to hurt her, and honestly, I can't blame her." She paused, staring at her hands. "Last week, she asked me to help her change her identity when she turns 18. New name, new social security number, new everything. She wants to disappear completely because she doesn't believe she'll ever be safe as long as she's the person your son destroyed." Some nights, I'd go home from these meetings and find messages waiting for me. Even from juvenile detention, my son had found ways to communicate through other inmates' family members, corrupt guards, and sympathetic visitors. The messages were masterpieces of manipulation. He'd apologize for the pain he'd caused, promise that he was getting better, express love for me, and hope for our future relationship. But embedded in every message were subtle threats. He'd mention specific details about my daily routine, about people I'd talked to, about places I'd been, making it clear that even locked up under maximum security, he was still watching, still gathering information, still planning. One message read, "I know you've been going to that support group. I understand why you need to process your feelings, but I hope you're not saying anything that might hurt my case. Some of the families there are very angry, and angry people sometimes make false accusations. It would be terrible if something happened to discredit them before my trial." Another said, "I've been thinking about our future together when I get out. I know you're disappointed in me now, but family is forever. I hope you're not making any permanent decisions about our relationship based on temporary emotions. That would be unfortunate for everyone involved." I stopped reading them and changed my phone number. It didn't matter. He always found ways to reach me. The sentencing hearing lasted 5 days. Over 40 victims and their families testified about the impact of my son's actions. Many couldn't speak without breaking down. Others delivered their statements with a cold fury that matched my son's own emotional detachment. A 14-year-old girl testified about how my son had gained her trust by pretending to struggle with similar family problems, then used her confessions about her parents' abuse to blackmail her for months. When she couldn't pay anymore, he'd reported her parents to child services, using information she'd shared in confidence, destroying her family and landing her in foster care. A 16-year-old boy described how my son had befriended him during his parents' divorce, offering emotional support and understanding. Then he'd used recordings of their private conversations to humiliate him at school, playing audio of him crying about his father leaving while making jokes about his weakness and emotional instability. The mother of the boy whose mother had died testified through tears about finding her son's suicide note, which referenced the online humiliation he'd experienced after my son posted recordings of his grief. She read part of the note aloud. "I can't live in a world where even my sadness about losing mom is entertainment for other people. I can't trust anyone ever again because I don't know who might be recording my pain to share with strangers. I just want to be with her where it's safe." The boy had survived his suicide attempt but required months of intensive psychiatric care and would likely struggle with trust issues for the rest of his life. But the most devastating testimony came from my son himself. When given the opportunity to address his victims and their families, he stood up and delivered what sounded like a heartfelt apology. "I want everyone here to know how deeply sorry I am for the pain I've caused. I was young and stupid, and I made terrible decisions that hurt innocent people. I think about what I did every day, and I'm committed to spending the rest of my life trying to make amends." Several family members were crying as he spoke. "I know I can never undo the harm I've caused, but I want you to know that your suffering has taught me the value of human dignity and compassion. I'm a different person now, and I promise that I will use my experience to help other young people avoid making the same mistakes I did." He paused, appearing to struggle with emotion. "To the families I've hurt, I can only ask for your forgiveness and promise that I will dedicate my life to making sure nothing like this ever happens again." It was a masterful performance. Even I almost believed it. Then the prosecutor played recordings of conversations my son had been having with other inmates at the detention facility. Conversations where he bragged about manipulating the court process, mocked his victim's pain, and detailed plans for continuing his operations after his release. In one recording, he described his courtroom apology as the performance of my life, and laughed about how easily he could make people believe he'd changed. In another, he explained his long-term strategy: lay low for a few years after release, rebuild his resources and contacts, then return to his previous activities with better security and more sophisticated methods. The most chilling recording was his description of the testimony he'd just heard from his victims. "Did you see how they were crying?" he asked another inmate. "It was beautiful. All that pain I caused, still fresh after all this time. That's real power. That's something that will last their whole lives." The judge listened to everything, then took a full day to prepare his sentencing statement. "This court has been deeply troubled by the evidence presented in this case. The defendant's actions demonstrate a level of cruelty and psychological sophistication that is extremely rare in someone so young. More disturbing is the complete absence of genuine remorse and the evidence that the defendant views his victim's ongoing suffering as a source of personal satisfaction." He was sentenced to 15 years in adult prison, followed by lifetime supervised probation. The conditions of his probation would include complete restriction from internet access, regular psychological evaluation, and no unsupervised contact with minors. He'd also have to pay full restitution to his victims, which totaled over $2 million when including medical expenses, therapy costs, and damages for emotional distress. As they led him away in shackles, he looked back at me one final time. "I'll never forgive you for this," he said loudly, making sure everyone in the courtroom could hear. "You chose them over your own son, but this isn't over. I have an excellent memory, and I'll have plenty of time to think about what you've done to me." The bailiff stepped between us, but my son kept talking. "Tell your new friends in the support group that I said hello. Tell them I hope their kids are doing well. I'd hate for anything else to happen to them." Even in shackles, even facing decades in prison, he was still trying to terrorize his victims through me. The house felt different without him, peaceful in some ways, but also haunted. Every room contained memories of the child I thought I'd raised alongside evidence of the monster he'd actually been. His bedroom became a storage space, but I couldn't bring myself to throw away his childhood belongings: photo albums from family vacations, artwork from elementary school, participation trophies from Little League, evidence of the innocent boy I'd loved, or maybe evidence of how completely I'd been deceived. Some of the victim families filed civil lawsuits against me personally, arguing that I should have recognized the signs and stopped him sooner. They had every right to be angry. I'd failed to protect their children from mine. My homeowner's insurance covered part of the damages, but nowhere near all of it. The total judgments against me exceeded $800,000. I had to declare bankruptcy, sell everything I owned, and liquidate my retirement savings. It still wasn't enough to cover the full amount. I moved into a studio apartment in a different part of town, working 2 jobs to pay what I could toward the settlements. The victim families deserved compensation, and I was the only source available since my son would likely never earn legitimate money. 6 months into his prison sentence, I got a call from the warden. "Your son has been caught running another operation," he explained. "He's been collecting detailed psychological profiles on other inmates and their families, then using that information to manipulate them into providing him with contraband, protection, and access to unauthorized communication methods. Even in maximum security prison, surrounded by criminals and under constant surveillance, he'd found a way to continue victimizing people. He's also been writing letters to his former victims," the warden continued. "We intercepted most of them before they were mailed, but some may have gotten through. The content is deeply disturbing. Detailed threats, promises of revenge, and attempts to re-establish psychological control. They moved him to a supermax facility with complete communication monitoring and 23-hour isolation. Even there, he found ways to continue his operations through corrupt guards and sympathetic visitors. The letters he was allowed to send me were still masterpieces of manipulation, even under heavy censorship. He'd express love and longing for our family relationship, then casually mention details about my current life that he shouldn't have known: where I'd moved after losing the house, what kind of car I was driving, where I was working, the names of people I'd met in my support group. He had contacts on the outside gathering information for him, building new files, maintaining his intelligence network even from prison. I moved again, changed jobs, went completely off social media, started using a different name at work. It didn't matter. He always found me. On his 21st birthday, he called from prison using time allocated for legal calls. "I'm an adult now," he said. "When I get out, you won't have any parental authority over me anymore." "I never had any authority over you," I replied. "That was always the problem." The silence stretched between us. "I've been thinking about what I want to do when I'm released," he continued. "I've been learning about cryptocurrency and blockchain technology in the prison library. There are incredible opportunities in that space. Completely legal applications, of course." My heart sank. Even after everything, even facing decades in prison, he was already planning his next scheme. "I've also been corresponding with some old friends from school through my lawyer," he said. "Just catching up, seeing how everyone's doing. It's amazing how people change over the years. But some things stay the same. Some people never really recover from their teenage experiences." The threat was clear. He was still reaching out to his former victims, still trying to maintain psychological control over them, even from prison. "I have to go," I said. "Wait, Mom. I know you're angry with me, but we're family. Blood is thicker than water. When I get out, I'm going to need your support. A place to stay while I get back on my feet. Maybe some startup capital for my new business ventures." I hung up and changed my number again. That was 5 years ago. He was released 2 months ago after serving only 8 years of his 15-year sentence due to good behavior and prison overcrowding. I know because his parole officer called to confirm my current address and phone number. "Your son is required to inform you that he's living in a supervised halfway house and is required to maintain employment," she said. "He's also restricted from using most forms of social media and internet communication under the terms of his parole. Do you want to maintain contact?" "No," I said. "Absolutely not." "Has he attempted to contact you since his release?" "Not directly," I lied. But he had. Within 48 hours of his release, strange things started happening. My credit score dropped suddenly due to mysterious inquiries. My work email was hacked. Someone had been calling my elderly neighbors, claiming to be conducting a survey about community safety, but really gathering information about my daily routine. My new car's tires were slashed while I was at work. Nothing was taken, but someone had left a note on my windshield. "Welcome back to the real world." Last month, I saw him at the grocery store. He was with a woman in her 60s, well-dressed and wearing expensive jewelry. She looked wealthy, lonely, and completely charmed by whatever story he was telling her. She reminded me of myself 20 years ago, proud of her thoughtful, mature young friend who paid such flattering attention to her. He saw me watching and smiled. That same cold, predatory smile I remembered from his arrest. He whispered something to the woman, and she looked in my direction with obvious pity. "Poor dear," I heard her say. "She looks so troubled." I left my cart and walked out. In the parking lot, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hi, Mom. Good to see you looking well. Hope you're enjoying your new apartment on Maple Street. Nice neighborhood. Very quiet and safe. Say hello to Mrs. Chen next door for me. She seems like such a sweet old lady. Would hate for anything to happen to disturb her peaceful retirement." I called the police, but they said there was nothing they could do. He hadn't directly threatened anyone, and proving he'd sent the message would be nearly impossible with current technology. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Chen's house was broken into. Nothing valuable was stolen, but someone had gone through her personal papers, photographed her financial documents, and accessed her computer. The police called it a random burglary, but I knew better. When I tried to warn Mrs. Chen, she looked at me like I was paranoid and delusional. "That nice young man who comes to visit sometimes," she said. "He's been so helpful with my computer problems. Such a polite, well-mannered boy. You should be proud of having such a caring son." I moved again that night. 3 days later, my new phone number received a text. "Running away again? This is exhausting for both of us. Why don't we just have a conversation like civilized adults?" I changed everything. Phone, email, job, apartment, even my legal name. It didn't matter. He always found me. The woman from the grocery store appeared on the local news 4 months later. She'd lost her life savings to a sophisticated cryptocurrency investment scam run by a charming young man she'd met at a coffee shop. He'd convinced her to invest in a fake blockchain startup, then disappeared with over $200,000. The police sketch looked exactly like my son, but he had a solid alibi. He'd been at his court-mandated job during the times the meetings supposedly took place. He'd recruited someone else to be his face while he ran the operation from behind the scenes, just like he'd done in high school. I wanted to call the woman, to warn her, to help somehow, but I knew that any contact from me would only make things worse for both of us. He'd see it as proof that I was still trying to interfere with his new life. Last week, I received a graduation announcement forwarded from my old address 3 moves ago. "You're cordially invited to celebrate the academic achievement of someone you know well. He has completed his online master's degree in business psychology, with a specialization in digital marketing and consumer behavior. The future looks bright for new opportunities and reconnections with old friends." At the bottom, in handwriting I recognized, was a simple message. "See you soon. We have so much catching up to do." I'm writing this from a hotel room 4 states away. I've quit my job, sold everything I owned, and I'm planning to disappear completely. New identity, new life, somewhere he can never find me, but I know he will. He always does. Just yesterday, I received a text on a phone number I'd bought with cash just hours earlier. "You can't run forever, Mom. Family is forever." The hardest part isn't the fear or the financial ruin or even the constant looking over my shoulder. The hardest part is knowing that somewhere out there, he's building a new network, finding new victims, destroying new lives, and there's nothing I can do to stop him. The boy I raised, the child I loved, the son I'd have died protecting, he was either gone forever or had never really existed at all. Some people can change. Some people can learn from their mistakes and grow into better human beings. My son will never be one of them. And the most terrifying part is that he's getting better at what he does. More sophisticated, more careful, harder to catch. Prison didn't rehabilitate him. It educated him. I sleep with a knife under my pillow now and motion sensors around my apartment. Not because I think they would stop him, but because the illusion of security is better than no security at all. But I know the truth. I'll never be free of him. None of his victims ever will be. He's out there right now, smiling at some lonely, trusting person, learning their weaknesses, planning their destruction, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop him. Because the monster I raised doesn't just destroy lives for money, and he's evolved beyond that. Now he destroys them because he's learned that human suffering is the purest form of power. And power for people like him is more addictive than any drug. He'll never stop. He'll never change. He'll just keep getting better at being the worst thing that can happen to another human being. And I'll spend whatever time I have left trying to stay one step ahead of the walking disaster I brought into this world.